People never know what is going on in somebody else's life.
Always waking up, or they were finding me outside of my locked room in another part of the house, on the back porch, locked out of the house, and then one time in the back seat of my dad's car in the driveway. So when something finally happens, when you're not in uniform, you're on vacation, you're moving with your family, and there's no one there to tell you not to talk about it, and it was witnessed by hundreds of people, including your family that's with you. It was time to finally be able to speak about it, and I did.
Welcome to the Evolving Reality Podcast. I'm Hanna Goss. Today's guest is retired U.S. Army veteran, Sergeant First Class Jeremy Weeks. Jeremy has over 20 years of service as a radar technician, supporting and leading global missions. Throughout his military career, he supported high-profile missions requiring disciplined analysis, leadership, and decision-making in complex environments. Since leaving the military, he's worked for defense contractor JB Management, or JBM, and is working on several stealth startups. He's also a lifelong experiencer of non-human intelligence. After an encounter on June 29th, 2015, he began receiving transmissions and communications layered with meaning, and those continue to this day. Originally interviewed by Linda Moulton Howe under the pseudonym CJ, he recently shared his experience on Area 52, hosted by Chris Ramsey. Welcome, Jeremy. It's an honor to be talking with you today.
It's an absolute pleasure meeting with you.
So, one of the things that I'm really struck by with your background is here you're a trained observer, you really bring this extensive credibility, yet you also have this incredible lifelong experience that we're going to talk about. What is that, kind of set the stage for us of what that has meant for you?
You know, to be honest with you, it was a challenge growing up as a child. When things like that were happening, I wasn't allowed to speak about it, at home or in my neighborhood or at school or anything. I was told to keep it at the family, keep it at the house. Because in those times they didn't want, my family didn't want people thinking that we were the crazy family on the end of the street,
Yeah.
or didn't want any kind of negative attention brought to us. So it was one of those things is like you only talk about it at home or you get in trouble. Don't talk about it outside. And so it was a lot of I can't talk about it. And then when I share it with my parents, they just brush everything off. I mean, yes, things frightened them, things bothered them, but they tend to brush everything off to keep me calm, I guess. And so I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And then, joining the military, I've had some encounters in the military, and you don't talk about those either. So when something finally happens, when you're not in uniform, you're on vacation, you're moving with your family, and there's no one there to tell you not to talk about it, and it was witnessed by hundreds of people, including your family that's with you. It was time to finally be able to speak about it, and I did. Um, and it was scary to even bring it forward, but
Yeah.
I felt I needed to get that out of my system. I need to share that, and so when I did, it just kind of opened the floodgates,
Hmm.
to say the least. And so yeah, it's been a challenge to deal with.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. And I really appreciate your bravery in coming forward because, I think this is one of the more challenging topics of the experiencer phenomena for people to kind of wrap their brains around. And there's a lot of fear around it. And, so I love that you're talking about it and that enables other people to talk about it. Because when I think about you, here you are, one of the most impactful jobs, stressful jobs, all of that. And you're showing up every day and have had this. So like people never know what is going on in somebody else's life. And the fact that you like are sharing this gives other people permission to share what's going on with them too. And maybe the rest of us to respect the experience and seek to understand rather than judge and to move out of that kind of society where your parents did have to have you keep it quiet, right? Hopefully, we're changing that.
Hopefully we will. I mean,
Yeah.
we're a large group and we got to consider ourselves different teams in that group, all fighting for the same thing. And we don't have a massive organization that that's essentially our coach and kind of helping us through
Hmm.
this. So
Yeah.
we have to look at things like helping each other out and making sure we like, subscribe, and share that information with others,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
even other podcasters of
Hmm.
others in the realm of what we're doing in our group.
Yeah.
We need to be better with ourselves and better with each other.
Yeah. Really agree with that. I'd like to kind of take a look, start at your childhood experience, because I think that really, because we're looking at the whole of you and not just that one event that has, you really talked a lot about, and we'll get to. But sort of kind of walk me, when did this first start happening to you, and what is it that you remember happening?
That's the thing. Maybe, I believe the first encounter happened probably that I could recall was I was about 2 or 3 years old or almost three. And I can only vaguely remember some of that stuff. I remember a lot more over time, but I just remembered um, some scary little thing coming into the room and into my bedroom and coercing me out of the bed until I stood up, and then I was somewhere else. Um, I was always somewhere else on a little craft with these little gray beans with big eyes, and they were trying to play with me and but I remember feeling some pain in some areas of my body, and then they would bring me back, and because they were scary, when they brought me back, I immediately, once they turned their head, I immediately hid wherever they brought me back home at. And usually that wasn't always my bedroom. That was around my home somewhere. So I've been brought back on the back porch and I would hide underneath the lawn chair. I've been brought back in my garage and I hid under a pile of dirty clothes. Not proud of that, but when I was a child, I was just trying to hide.
Of course,
And
of
so,
course.
I've been brought back into the living room and hid behind the couch when I would always just hide where they brought me back. And I would stay there, in fear until I fell asleep. And then that's when my family would find me somewhere else in the house. And I just recall having those. At the time, I considered them scary because they were scary little creatures that they were never mean. They never beat on me or anything like that. It was just
Yeah.
they were scary looking, and sometimes pain would happen when I was with them. And so, as a child, and in my mind at that time, I considered it scary and a scary experience. As anyone would, at that age. So that's how I
Yeah.
perceive things at the time.
And what you were seeing, so you mentioned grays, is that the species you were seeing at that time, or were there multiple species?
There was only the two, and I saw short grays and tall grays, and the tall
Okay.
grays kept their distance. They stayed away. Um, they were quite larger, more than 2 or 3 times my size at that time. I mean,
Hmm.
so they were massive. It'd be like looking at a giant, at that
Hmm.
age, at my height. So I primarily had the encounter with the small ones, but I do remember seeing the tall ones, in the areas at times when I was taken.
Yeah. And was it, you said they coerced you out of bed. What does that mean?
They they would coerce me out of bed by acting silly, playing with my toys. And sometimes I had favorite toys and I didn't want anyone messing with my toys. My favorite toys is I didn't want them broken, as a child. And even when you had
Hmm.
friends over, you didn't want your friends breaking your favorite toy. So you'd always kind of hold your favorite toy, or hide it or keep it away from your friends so they wouldn't tear it up. So it was that mindset. They would do things or grab my hand and start pulling on me, not forcing me, but trying to coerce me out of my bed or out from underneath my bed. Because at times I would sleep underneath my bed because I thought they were going to come. And so at times they started out coercing me out of the. It got to a point where I would just be pulled out from underneath my bed where I was sleeping because they knew what I was doing. I was hiding from them. And so it stopped, the coercing kind of gave way, and it was more or less like they're just going to pull me out, and then I was going to disappear and be in another location.
Hmm.
So it that's how it kind of evolved over time, from what I recall and what I remember. Um, I do recall that troubled my parents. My parents were, they tried everything to keep me. They thought I was sleepwalking. So, they turned my doorknob around so they could lock me in my room. They moved my brother out of his room and put bunk beds in my room so that my brother was in there so that they could ask him, well, what was Jeremy doing? I don't know. I was asleep.
Hmm.
So it was, they put locks on my windows in my room. There was no attic or crawl space in my room, but somehow I was getting, and from 2 to 4 years old, somehow a 2 to 4 year old was always waking up, or they were finding me outside of my locked room in another part of the house, on the back porch, locked out of the house, and then one time in the back seat of my dad's car in the driveway. The house was still locked. My bedroom door was still locked. My windows weren't messed with or tampered with, and they would find me in the most oddest places at times. And I think that's what terrified them. And they didn't want, they didn't know, they didn't have an answer. And they certainly didn't want to report anything and have, like, child
Hmm.
services come out and think that, my parents were being, bad parents, which they were not. They were great parents. They weren't drinkers. They weren't wild with us. They weren't abusive. I loved my parents. They did a good job, I thought. And so I hold nothing against my parents. I
Yeah.
love both of them dearly. Um, I have an understanding of what was probably going through their minds, and how it may have affected them.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's just how I perceive things
Yeah.
and
And
how how things transpire.
I think that's one of the really scary things for people around the experiencer phenomenon is not only if they're getting taken, but if their children are being taken and without the ability to, do anything about it. That's kind of hits one of those core fears that any parent would have. And I'm curious, so when you were being taken, you had said there would be pain. Was it always painful? What were they doing with you as much as you can recall?
And so, no, it wasn't always painful. Sometimes I would feel pains. I would feel, like pin pricks or pokes or jabs. Um, but not always. Sometimes I would have headaches. Sometimes I would feel something pressed against my head, or sometimes I would feel something, cold pressed against, an area or spot on my back near my spinal cord. Um, I'm not sure what was transpiring, what was happening, but it wasn't always painful. Only at times it was, and you know, you kind of don't get used to it. I guess I would say as a child, because the moment I started to get used to these small grays and their scary appearance, as a child. That's when I would see a tall gray, and it was like, wow, that one's even more scary, more
Yeah,
scary. So,
yeah.
like, just as soon as you start getting comfortable with the short grays, um, you something else will happen which makes you, as a child, reminds you that this is something completely different that you've never seen before, and it's still kind of scary. You can't
Hmm.
really, I mean, you can try to defend yourself, but you're not going to be able to defend yourself if
Yeah.
you need to. And so I think is that part of the fear set in when I was young, before I had an understanding of what was actually happening. I needed to mature, I needed to grow up,
Hmm.
that kind of thing, to have a better understanding of things.
Yeah.
But I don't think
And
they were violent with me, or they were never violent or aggressive with me.
and what
I mean,
age did you say this started? When you were what age?
um, after talking with my parents, they said that, I think the first time that they had, um, put me to bed and they found me somewhere else was 2 years old, almost three. They said it was
Wow.
near my third birthday when that first started
Wow.
happening. So it was, right near my third birthday. I think that was the first time that they had put me to bed and I had woken up somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a lot. Did it continue on throughout your childhood into your teens?
No, this primarily happened from 2 to 4, for just a span of time. As I got older, I would call sleeping encounters or encounters when I was asleep. Um, I remember when I was playing Pop Warner football and I was in elementary school, I would say I was getting close to fifth, maybe I was in fourth grade, I think I was at the time. And I remember having an encounter where when I woke up, my knee was hurting pretty bad.
Mm,
And I had trouble, at my little Pop Warner football practice, I was kind of limping around. It was like, what happened? I don't know. I woke up and it was hurting. It was like, well, what did you do in your sleep? I don't want to talk about it, that kind of thing.
mm,
It was one of those moments that, something happened in one of my encounters, and I don't 100% recall exactly what happened. I do remember falling and, where I was at in one of these little vessels where I heard it, or I yanked away from something and I heard it, but it affected me the next day pretty bad and it was bruised up. And my parents just thought that it happened at football practice the day before or whatnot.
mhm.
There's always like a story that can correct. Well, that's probably what happened is you heard it during football practice the day before,
Mhm.
but
Right.
really I didn't. It was fine. It was if you don't want to hear me out, that's fine. I'm a child and you don't have to believe me, but this is what I remember. This is
Hmm.
why I think what happened and how I heard it. But, I had those things happen throughout, my childhood and as I was getting older. I remember things happening when I was in high school, that once again startled my stepfather, at the time. But yeah, these things tend to happen when I was
Yeah.
younger, and then they were just difficult to analyze, with a youthful mind and not fully developed yet.
All right. So you can't lay that down and not tell us. So what
Okay, yeah.
startled your stepdad?
It was we had lived in I went to a high school in Orlando, Florida, right next to Universal Studios.
Mhm.
I think that's about as close as if you're familiar with Orlando, Florida, then you're going to be familiar with what high school I'm referring to. But we lived further away. My dad taught at the high school. He was a teacher there, and I would ride with him, to school. But the night before, I had an encounter. I was taken, and I was kind of zooming around. Um, while there were some things that was happening with me, with some small grays and tall grays. And at this time, I was kind of the tall grays were kind of messing with me at the time and manipulating things on me. They weren't being aggressive either. Um, but I remember that particular encounter. It wasn't painful, and they only needed, a couple of things from me, and then they were finished, and I was able to walk around and look at things, and I remember that encounter very clearly. And I remember going to an area where I can see out, what's outside of the vessel that I'm in. And I remember going over an area of uh, the route that my dad usually takes, to take it to school. And as we're slowly going over this area and heading back, I know they're bringing me back to drop me off. As we're going over this area, I fully witnessed a car accident, a traffic accident. I witnessed it. I witnessed it on the vessel. And so they finished bringing me back, and I'm put back in my body. I'm put back wherever, at home. And my dad's throwing the door open. He's like, "Get up! It's time for school. Come on, get dressed. Don't give me any lip. Get up, let's go." Yeah, I'm a heavy sleeper, so I'm always like, "No, I want to go back to sleep." And my dad was always like, "Nope, it's time to go. It's time to go. Get up." And so I was up, getting dressed. And then we head out to the vehicle and start, driving to school. And I said, "Dad, we can't go this way." He's like, "What are you talking about? We have to go. We're going this way. This is how we get there." And I was like, "Yeah, but we're going to be blocked off because there's a big car accident." And he's like, "There's no big car accident." And he's like, "Yes, there is." "What were you watching the news?" And I was like, "Did you hear the TV on?" "No, I wasn't watching the news. I know there's a big accident." And he's like, "Jeremy, I don't have time for games." And I was like, "Dad, we're not going to be able to get through because there's a big car accident." And so he just kind of ignored me, and he drove. He didn't have the radio on or nothing. 'Cause he was kind of rehearsing what he was gonna, I guess something he was gonna do with his students that day. And so he had little cue cards. He was kind of reading his cue cards. And then we get further up the road, and then there's tons of police, fire trucks, everything. They had blocked the whole thing, and they were turning everybody around. And he just kind of stared at me. He's like, "How in the hell did you know that?" And he was like, "Dad, I told you." He was like, "Well, how did you know it was going to be blocked?" And I said, "I saw it in my dream." And he just like, "Whatever, Jeremy. Okay, if you want to play games with me." He was like, "Dad, I'm not playing games. I was sleeping, and I saw it happen. I saw the accident happen before all the police were here." And so it shocked him, it surprised him. And he knows he was downstairs. He was staying on me to get up and get ready and get dressed. He knows I didn't turn any TV on. He knows for a fact that I didn't listen to any news. I was hurrying up because I like to sleep in. So he
Hmm.
was kind of rushing me to get dressed and let's go. And so he knows that I didn't look anything up. We weren't listening to the radio. He was just shocked that I knew about it before we
Wow.
encountered it. And so we had to find another route around. And I told him which route to go, and it
Yeah.
was nice and clear the whole way. And
Yeah.
so he was shocked. But and then he brought it up, later that day. How did you know about that? I was like, "Dad, I told you it was in my dream." You did not see that in your dream. How did you? I was like, "Dad, I dreamt it, or it happened in my sleep. I saw it happen when I was sleeping." And so he just like, whatever. And he came home and told my mom about it. And she was like, "Wow, yeah, that happens a lot with him from time to time." And so it was
Wow.
just one of those encounters that he was truly shocked and surprised that I knew about it. He thought I was like psychic or something. I was like, "No, Dad, I'm not psychic. I'm not a psychic. I saw it. I witnessed the traffic accident
Yeah.
happen, and I could tell you how it happened, and I described it. And sure enough, on the news, they described it the same way." And he was like, "What?
That's
What?"
remarkable. Yeah. I do want to ask you, so you kind of said they were messing with you, and you also kind of brought up that you weren't sure if your spirit was leaving your body or if they were literally taking your body. With the messing with you, like were they manipulating you physically? Were they examining you? What was that was going, and what makes you think maybe they were just taking your spirit and not your body?
I mean, it's a possibility that they're just taking my spirit. But if they were just taking my spirit, it wouldn't affect my physical
Right. How
form.
would you
So if
have
I,
the
so,
knee?
so, so if I, if, and there's been encounters where I haven't had any injuries at all or anything like
Mhm.
that, but I have had encounters where I've had strange marks left on me from time to time. I've had a hole in my eye and my eyeball that healed up. I mean, who can see perfectly after having a hole in your eye and you don't have any idea of where that hole came from? I've got
Mhm.
imagery I could send you. You
Yeah,
can
I
put on here
do.
later, but that would be great. But yeah, I've got imagery where I've got a hole in my eye and I still have perfect 20/20 vision. I can't explain it.
Mhm.
Um, Besides that, I'm not sure if they're taking me. I have a feeling they're taking my physical form and bringing me back. But I'm not ruling out the fact that they could just be taking my. It could be an out of body experience at times as well. Um, but I do recall having all five senses when I am taken. I could feel the temperature of the room. I could smell the environment, know what it smells like. It's a characteristic smell, that you don't forget about. And it changes and alters from time to time, but there's a temperature. When you're touching a metal surface, it's either colder or it's warmer, or you feel vibration coming from it. There's a lot of senses that are involved that just point out that these aren't dreams, because when we have dreams, I can't recall one dream I've ever had where all of my senses are functioning and working correctly.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if anyone has, I don't know if that's even possible. But I recognize that all of my senses are in full effect working when some of these encounters take place.
Which seems like
And
it
it
goes beyond even just lucid dreaming or anything
Right. I
like
mean,
that. Yeah.
and if you really think about things, we discussed earlier that our bodies are very interesting vessels that we're living with. I mean, yes, we're blood, we're bone, and we're mostly water. But we are actually producing electricity,
Yeah.
a micro amount of electricity, and we're producing photons. We're producing light. So it's a microforms, and this is essentially, on the molecular level, a micro amount, but even our skin cells, on our cellular level, we're producing photons. Um, when you take that in consideration, then essentially we're an antenna. We're
Hmm.
we're we're an antenna. And we're like amplifiers, where
Yeah.
we have these abilities that are dormant within us, and I believe,
Yeah.
and um, I think they're just helping us bring them out,
Yeah.
on different levels.
I definitely want to come back to this, but I want to kind of move us
Absolutely.
on. So, in the army, when did you join?
I joined immediately after the World Trade
Mhm.
Centers were attacked. In fact, I was um, on a plane when the plane got shut down, and they came and picked us up with a bus.
Wow.
So this was immediately after September 11th. Air traffic had all been shut down. I had already at the time felt like it was time for me to do something different. And so I had gone down, taken ASVAB. I did really well on the ASVAB. I could choose any job I wanted, and I chose, field artillery radar. It was like that seemed like what I wanted to do. It was like screaming out to me, "This is your job. This is what you need to do." So I did that, and went to MEPS and passed MEPS and my physical, and I was on a plane. But then halfway en route, they shut the plane down for some sort of emergency. They shut all air traffic down. They came by and picked us up in a bus, and then we went from there, on to my basic training, on the bus, and went on from there. So this was in, October, September, October,
September
uh,
11th. Yeah.
2001. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would have been what, about 18?
No, no, I
No.
was in my 20s,
Oh, okay.
22, 23, I
Okay.
would say. Yeah.
Okay. And did the phenomena continue while you were in the military?
Yes, it has. I
Yeah.
kept quiet about it though, quite often.
Yeah. Were you ever in barracks when it happened, or how did that happen when it would happen?
I don't recall it ever happening in barracks. Um, when I was in basic training, my mind was focused on getting through basic training, passing everything, staying alert. So yeah, I don't recall things like that happening when I was in barracks. Um, when I was, around a lot of different people. This generally happens when I'm sleeping alone, separated, or with a spouse. Um, so yeah, I don't recall it happening in
Mhm.
large groups like that I can remember right offhand. Right offhand.
So you never had any experiences while you were in the army where like it drew attention or you caught it on radar or anything like that? Nothing like that ever happened.
Well, I'm not saying that at all, because we have tracked a lot of different things on radar. There's a lot of things that I can't talk about with that.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say in my first deployment in the area of Fallujah, some very interesting things happened there as well that I don't want to totally delve into right now. But there's a lot of things that were happening in Iraq around that time. Um, and we're talking like no later than 2006 time frame. And that's like literally my cutoff right now. I can't talk
Okay.
anything after 2006, currently,
Yeah.
legally.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
And, I really respect and appreciate your service, particularly right after September 11th. That was a traumatic experience for, I think, the world, but particularly Americans. And so I really appreciate your service and not willing to step over the line. But gee, I think you probably just triggered a lot of questions for a lot of us. And if you ever can talk about it, I would love for you to come back on the show and talk about what that experience was, experiences were and what that was like.
Yeah,
So
very
then,
possible. I just have to kind of look into things, make sure I'm not
yeah,
violating
yep,
anything. But
wouldn't
there's a
wouldn't
lot
want
of
to,
rumors going around and the Fallujah area around that time. And I definitely signed, NDAs or
Hmm.
non-disclosure orders at those times. So I've got to make sure that I'm not violating anything with those.
Yeah. Well, the government is releasing a lot of information, so maybe as that continues to roll out, some of that will be a part of that, enable you to start to talk about it.
It's useless information, just to keep us busy. That's all it is. It's just to keep
Yeah.
us busy. You got
Yeah.
to think the government's going to, they want people involved in politics disputes. They want people involved in all kinds of silly things to keep us busy and asking the real questions. So I mean, yeah, these release files are just, they're just meant to waste time. And they're just meant to insult and waste time, I think, in my opinion. Nothing very substantial is going to come from them.
So the next thing that I think I have heard you talk about, and I think it was with Chris Ramsey, was that your wife had an experience with you kind of shortly before that June 29th experience where, what happened with that? What can you tell us about that experience? I know you don't remember. What does your wife remember?
Um, I had before we made that trip. This I would say it was about a week or two
Mhm.
before we left. Uh, we had gone to bed, and at some point during the night, and I don't recall this, but at some point during the night, I got up and went into the restroom. And she's a very light sleeper, so she heard me get out of the bed and walk into the restroom. She didn't think much of it, but then she heard me like fall to the ground in the bathroom. And then I guess she went in to check on me. And then when I was on the floor, and as soon as she touched me, um, I started saying a string of zeros and ones repetitively. And then she tried to cover my mouth, and I kept saying them. And then she shook me, and I would pause, and then I would start saying them again. And then she tightly covered my mouth to prevent me from speaking, and I was trying to scratch them on the door with my finger. And then she shook me and I stopped and my eyes were still awake, still wide open. And I just kind of calmly got up and walked right back to the bed, got into bed and went right back to sleep like if
Mm,
nothing happened. And so,
yeah.
yeah, this surprised the hell out of her. And she told me about it the next morning. I was like, I did what now? I did that? I walked in there and was like, yeah. He was like, you don't remember it? And I was like, no. He was like, your eyes were wide open, looked right at me. Like you looked right through me like I didn't exist and walked right by me and went right back to bed. And I was like, no, I don't recall any of that. So
Mm.
it was a surprise that, she had encountered. I don't recall it though. And that's the weirdest thing because how would I not recall that? That was interesting. And then, of course, we went on our trip and then this happened. And so
Yeah.
she
Well, let's
she
set
kind of
up the trip.
correlated the two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's no, first of all, was there anything other that your wife kind of remembered about kind of these encounters or kind of witnessing you in these encounters up until that time where you had the zeros and ones come through?
Um, like moments where she's witnessed things about me. Um,
Like, you have this woman sleeping next to you and you're having these encounters continuing. Did she ever notice anything or see anything? Were you talking to her about it? Did she, other than this kind of first experience where you have the zeros and ones, was there anything else that came
I
up?
was I was kind of private about things. I did mention that I've had some odd experiences happen to me when I was younger. I didn't want to, we were recently married, at that time. And so we were still very new. And I didn't want to scare her away with, hey, guess what?
Hey.
It was more or less like I've had some odd experiences happen to me when I was younger. And I explained some of those things. And she's like, wow, that's really weird. But it was what brought those up is that while she was with me, at times she would see glowing balls of orbs in the room, and it startled her. And so that's when I thought it was time for me to mention something to her about it. And so then I mentioned it, brought it up, and she's like, "Huh, that's kind of weird." I didn't go in depth. I didn't
Hmm.
go. I didn't go full in. I didn't fully share everything. I was kind of vague with some information because it's kind of embarrassing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You don't want people to think you're a crazy person.
Hmm.
You know, I've had my head checked. I'm not crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just as crazy as anybody else out there, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with me. I've got no tumors or anything. But it was just one of those things that you kind of don't want to share everything because you're still
Hmm.
not sure what's actually happened. And if you don't have all the answers, then how can you
Hmm.
delve too much deeper into it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I shared some things and she was aware of some things beforehand, but it was that encounter that really like those are that's a mind-blowing thing to happen, right in front of you. And then it's like a sudden shift in your life. Whereas like, well, I never believed in any of this before, but now that I'm looking at it right now in my face and
Well,
this is
let's get
happening
into
right at
that.
this moment, yeah,
Yeah,
then
let's get into this. So you all were getting ready to move from Georgia to Colorado. Do I have that right?
correct. Yeah.
And you were, so take us back to that June 29th. Was it morning,
2015.
night, 2015? Yeah,
Yeah.
so take us back and kind of share with us what happened. Evolving Reality is created and hosted by Hanna Goss as a part of Hanna Goss Coaching. Music and production support are by Cassie Frankovich. The views and experiences shared are those of the individual guests and are presented to encourage thoughtful exploration and open dialogue. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or any affiliated individuals or organizations. This podcast is intended to create a space where evidence, experience, and curiosity can coexist. Listeners are encouraged to think critically, do their own research, and come to their own conclusions. Nothing shared on this podcast should be considered medical, psychological, legal, financial, or professional advice. Thank you for exploring with us.